Welcome back to the Renaissance Humanism podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Riley. I'd like to say thank you to my new subscribers. Your support is very much appreciated. Okay, today's episode I will be discussing China in crisis. China, according to the geopolitical analyst Peter Zine, this decade will be China's last decade as an international power due to the entire system of the Chinese Communist Party may also implode due to the breakup of China this decade. It's not clear precisely what's happening in China. China is in crisis with youth unemployment hitting a high as of June 2023 of 21.3%, aged between 16 and 24, though data coming out of China is becoming increasingly hard to get by due to increasing authoritarianism, the nature of the Xi Jinping's regime becoming more of a one-man state and in purging of any people that could disagree with Xi Jinping, as well as the previous two factional leaders within China that have been purging the system to make it more of a one-party state. The reason for this youth unemployment is not enough graduate jobs being created in the Chinese economy that can help develop its middle classes. There's a mismatch between Chinese university graduates and the jobs available within the Chinese economy. The last time there was this imbalance in China was the Tiananmen Square massacre, which happened in 1989, with massive protests in the Chinese mainland. China is also facing a crisis with its population being miscounted of at least 100 million, and those people are the millennials who were born between 1981 and 1996, which has increased the price of labour in China, and the retirement age of China is boomer generation in their 60s. Unless they increase the retirement age up until the late 60s, that means the price of labour in China will increase, and that means that buying goods and services within China that are exported around the globe will become more expensive. But the Americans, they've isolated themselves from China, they're decoupling from the Chinese economy, and also using the workforce within Mexico in order to ensure the American public continues to have cheap manufacturing goods, which they have become accustomed to. For the rest of the world, I've not noticed this growing crisis within China and its economy, partly due to the United States being more concerned with the Orange Man, aka Donald Trump, the Chinese rearming, and the COVID-19 pandemic meant that governments were looking primarily inwards. The Chinese Communist Party put forward a grand vision of China being a united entity for at least the past 2,000 years, if not more, going back for 4 millennium. This is unfortunately complete and utter bullshit. As a united entity, China has spent more years being divided into separate warring kingdoms than it has been as a united entity. China is a monoculture dominated by the Han Chinese, making up 92% of its population, though those figures can be very different depending on what kind of cis it's looking at. But for China, the definite group is the Han Chinese. If you went to China, because for me, I'm a white Caucasian man, if you're somebody from anywhere else, you will never be Chinese. I don't know how their political society works. If you move to Germany, you become German no matter your skin tone. You move to the UK, you could be from Pakistan originally, or your ethnic background can be from your family. You get to be English, you get to be British. For China, you will always be an outsider. Same goes for Japan. With South Korea, things might be changing there because they're trying to encourage women to immigrate in order to move in there and actually have children. That's also occurring in Japan as well. So it's a bit fuzzy there. That's the social norm. China is typically disunited, but during different moments in its long and bloody history. Power in the northern Chinese plains, aka northern China, is united under a new dynasty or regime that then proceeds to go forth and conquer the other regions of what we now regard as southern China. China is a massive country that requires a centralized government, typically one from northern China, with other regions breaking away at different points in its history in order to be reintegrated again into a greater China. China faces many crises that could see the nation shatter and reintegrate after a period of civil war or disunity. So basically, when Chinese state becomes too authoritarian, its regions, or particularly southern China, starts to break away. either forming new political entities or joining outside of the kingdom, outside of the empire, and then reintegrated again when a power eventually conquers northern China or unites northern China that goes forth, brings to other regions back into what we now regard as China. And this has been repeated over and over again throughout history. Now, let's talk about China's food and energy security. China is dependent upon food and energy imports, and this is the reason why China is facing a crisis due to the reliance on supply routes stretching from the Bosporus and the Aegean through the Persian Gulf and through the Indian and Vietnam Seas, which is a vulnerable supply line for China. All it takes in China's enemies are state-sponsored privateers to seize these goods, which could devastate the Chinese economy. If the USA and China went to war today, China would starve to death within 6 months. China is dependent on global supply chains and global security that have historically been maintained by the Pax Britannica, that's from 1815 to 1914, and then from 1945 to the present day by the Pax Americana. Basically, China is dependent on the infrastructure, and more importantly, the protection of the seas that was guaranteed historically first by the Royal Navy, during the Pax Britannica, then during the Pax Americanus with the US Navy. With the United States no longer interested in global affairs, and the global system is now going away because the United States is no longer focused on constructing destroyers, it's focused on creating nation killers by developing its super carrier fleet. And at the moment, the US Navy has 72 destroyers and 17 cruisers. This is not enough to patrol the world's oceans. The United States has around 15 supercarriers, I believe. There's 2 more under construction. That's part of that total of 15. There's debating whether or not that total will actually be constructed, but those supercarriers can only patrol 15 different places. And as for the destroyers, they can only deploy 72 locations, not taking into consideration any necessary escorts or flotillas. The point is that America doesn't have the ships to secure the world's oceans, but it does has the navy capable of knocking out other countries. China cannot develop a strong enough navy before the United States pulls out of the globalized system. And also, China is getting old before it can get young and before it can transfer itself first from agricultural economy into an industrial economy, which has done over the past 30 years, and then from industrial economy into a consumer economy that England, France, Germany, that most of the European nations have become. China, they've run out of time. The domestic population can no longer meet the requirements to meet domestic consumption as well, due to the collapse of its population and its aging out of its population. It's not going to happen all at once, but it will happen slowly because it takes 20 years to get a 20-year-old. And the best time for a woman to get pregnant, depending, this varies in different countries' legal age for when people can have sex. But just for international audience, I'll say between 21 and 35. It's the optimal window for a woman to get pregnant. And because people are getting pregnant later and later, and that's used to different concerns within nations, people are having kids. So when they do have kids, they might only have one child, and that is not enough people actually consuming resources to keep the economy and the state running. That's the massive issue that's not just facing China, but facing nations all around the world in the developed world. Just that at the moment, first we're going to see this crisis in China, we're going to see it in South Korea, we're going to see it in Russia, and we're going to see it in Germany. They will be the communities in the coal mine, and we'll see how they react to the situation. I mean, it was really, really badly, which it looks like it's going to be the case. If they wake up call to the rest of the world, it might already be too late due to the anti-child culture. It's going to be the end of today's episode. If you have any questions, either message me over Substack, message me on Medium, or message me down in the comment section. But usually the best place to find me is on Medium or Substack. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you found it informative, and peace out.